Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. You know that feeling, right? Replaying a slightly awkward conversation in your head, or obsessing over some vaguely worded email from your boss? We all do it. But what happens when that mental switch just refuses to flip off? Well, today we're diving into exactly how a perfectly normal human habit of reflecting on things can slowly snowball into a diagnosable condition. And get this, it's a condition that literally, physically reshapes the architecture of your brain. Let's get right into it.
Right now, roughly 40 million adults in the United States alone are quietly fighting a war inside their own heads. To put that into perspective, that is nearly 1 in 5 people. They're not just having a streak of bad luck or a stressful week. They are completely paralyzed, trapped in a loop of their own thoughts. And the crazy thing is, many of these anxiety cases don't just appear out of thin air. They take root in something that sounds completely harmless at first: overthinking.
So the crucial point here is recognizing exactly when a normal thought turns toxic. In the clinical world, doctors call this repetitive negative thinking. See, your brain evolved over thousands of years to scan for things like saber-toothed tigers, tangible, immediate physical threats. But today in our modern world, that exact same survival machinery gets jammed trying to solve abstract problems you simply cannot control. Things like what your boss really thinks of you, or some looming vague deadline. When this happens, a simple habit of reflection morphs into something far more serious, and it becomes a main driver for conditions like generalized anxiety disorder.
To really grasp how this everyday habit becomes so destructive, we need to break overthinking down into 3 distinct clinical phases. First up, we've got rumination. This guy lives entirely in the past. It replays old mistakes on a loop, and the data shows it rarely brings any actual insight. Mostly, it just deepens depression. Second is worry. Worry looks exclusively at the future. It's totally obsessed with the what-ifs. And unlike normal planning, which actually builds confidence, pathological worry just breeds intense doubt and pure mental exhaustion. And finally, we have intrusive thoughts. These are those sudden, completely unwanted flashes in your mind. And here's the kicker. If you try to aggressively push them away, it causes a rebound effect, meaning those exact same thoughts come roaring back even more forcefully.
Now, there is a stark difference between a healthy, problem-solving mind and an anxious one. Constructive problem-solving is deliberate. You sit down, you focus on the issue, you find a real solution, and boom, it leads to actual growth and closure. Overthinking, on the flip side, is like being trapped inside an emotional tornado. You're just chasing an illusion of control over something you were honestly never going to control in the first place. You're just spinning and spinning in pure emotional overdrive.
So, how do we end up stuck in this tornado to begin with? Well, psychology gives us a few pretty interesting models. The first is called the intolerance of uncertainty model. Basically, if you have a really low tolerance for the unknown, you might try to plan for literally every possible disaster to a wildly excessive degree. You might actually trick yourself into believing that your worrying is a good thing, falsely thinking it somehow protects you. Add in a deep lack of confidence in your ability to handle problems, or using that constant, loud mental chatter to actively dodge deeper, more uncomfortable emotions, and you've got a perfect storm for anxiety.
But right here is where things get truly fascinating, and honestly, a bit dangerous. Welcome to the Metacognitive Model. In this model, the actual subject of your worry barely even matters anymore. What matters is what you believe about the process of thinking itself. The real danger zone is when a person develops what's called type 2 worry. This is meta-worry. It's when you actually start worrying about worrying. You start believing your own worrying is completely uncontrollable, or that you might literally lose your mind. This creates a massive, self-feeding loop that doesn't even need an external trigger anymore to keep going.
Which brings us to a really strange question. Why on earth do we keep overthinking if it hurts so much? Well, the contrast avoidance model reveals something wild. Worrying actually acts as a bizarre defense mechanism. By keeping yourself anxious all the time, you avoid the sharp, unexpected shock of sudden disappointment if something bad actually does happen. And since the massive disasters we fear almost never come true, all that worrying eventually ends in a huge wave of relief. So, quite accidentally, the brain learns to repeat this painful cycle because, ironically enough, that wave of relief when disaster doesn't strike feels highly rewarding to your nervous system.
Okay, but here's where we need to pay close attention, because this stops being just a quirky psychological habit and becomes a genuine physical hazard. Overthinking leaves measurable physical marks on your brain. Your body's central alarm system, the HPA axis, gets switched on and it just stays on, permanently. Suddenly, your brain is taking a constant bath in cortisol, and over time, the stress hormone stops acting like a helpful fight or flight tool, and it starts acting like a slow-moving neurotoxin.
This constant chemical bath literally damages your brain's architecture. First, your hippocampus, the part that normally regulates stress, actually shrinks. It physically loses its ability to hit the brakes on your anxiety. Second, your prefrontal cortex also shrinks. And by the way, this is the actual biological reason you experience brain fog, indecision, or task paralysis when you're stressed. It's neurology, not a character flaw. Finally, with those two regulatory centers weakened, your amygdala, your brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive, just firing off constant irrational panic.
Furthermore, modern brain imaging shows that this damage severely disrupts your major mental networks. The system that controls your internal thoughts traps you in a never-ending replay loop. The system responsible for cognitive control completely breaks down, and abnormalities in how your brain shifts attention mean you literally cannot focus on anything else. Scientists call this whole package impaired disengagement. It basically means the overthinker hasn't just chosen to keep worrying, their brain has genuinely physically lost the ability to look away.
And sadly, this physical damage compounds over time. Scientists refer to this as the cognitive debt hypothesis. It's a somewhat terrifying reality that years of repetitive negative thinking slowly but surely drain your brain's long-term cognitive reserves. In fact, longitudinal studies are showing that chronic overthinking in older adults causes significantly steeper drops in long-term memory, reasoning, and overall cognitive function as we age. It's basically a slow drain on your brain power.
Now, this next finding is a real jaw-dropper. This cognitive drain is actually linked to a buildup of amyloid beta and tau proteins in the brain. If you follow neurology at all, you already know that these are the exact same biological markers found in Alzheimer's disease. Let that sink in for a second. The long-term stakes of this continuous mental looping are incredibly, incredibly high.
But it's not just about what happens years down the line. The immediate effects are just as punishing. You know those nights where you're just staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m.? That mental noise cycle is completely wrecking your restorative REM and deep sleep. This creates this vicious cycle of fatigue. It weakens your immune system, and it pretty much guarantees that your prefrontal cortex will be way too exhausted to regulate your racing thoughts the very next day. It just feeds itself, night after night.
Okay, take a deep breath, because there is some seriously good news here. You absolutely do not have to stay stuck in this loop. The cycle can be broken using proven clinical interventions. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, teaches you to challenge those distorted thoughts with actual evidence. Or acceptance and commitment therapy teaches you to view thoughts simply as passing mental weather, rather than absolute truths. But perhaps the most powerful tool of all is metacognitive therapy. This approach goes straight for the root belief, using a technique called detached mindfulness. It basically teaches your brain that worry is both entirely controllable and ultimately totally harmless.
And the success rate for this is just phenomenal. Clinical research shows that metacognitive therapy achieves a staggering 80 to 90% recovery rate for generalized anxiety disorder. Let me repeat that, 80 to 90%. We aren't just talking about a minor improvement in symptoms here. This means the vast majority of patients who engage in this treatment walk away entirely free of the cycle. That is huge.
You can also take control starting today by building some powerful daily habits to protect your brain. Try something called worry scheduling. Basically, give yourself a strict 15 to 20-minute daily window, like office hours, just for worrying, and strictly ban it outside of that time. You can also use the 5-4-3-2-1 sensory grounding technique to snap your mind right back to the present moment. Or try 4-7-8 controlled breathing to immediately lower those circulating stress hormones. Pairing these with regular physical activity and severely limiting your exposure to constant news and social media triggers will cut off the anxiety supply before it even takes hold.
The path to a healthy mind is entirely possible. Honestly, the most empowering takeaway from all of this science today is this. Recognizing the exhaustion and noticing those warning signs is your very first crucial step back to reality. Yes, left unchecked, overthinking is a slow accumulation that can physically reshape your brain. But remember this, the mind that learned to spiral can absolutely be retrained to find peace.
We've covered the psychology, the physical damage to your brain, and the proven ways to finally break free. Now that you know overthinking isn't just a bad mood, but something that actively reshapes your brain's architecture, I want to leave you with this question. What actionable step will you take to protect your mind the very next time you catch yourself starting to spiral? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and go take control of your thoughts today.